Freddy Krueger, A Nightmare. On Elm Street. For the Dream Master. What happens? In The Dream Master, Freddy Krueger is finally confronted inside the dream world he dominates. Alice, now empowered by the souls and strengths of Freddy's previous victims, refuses to run from him. Instead of being hunted, Freddy becomes the target. Alice forces him to face the spirits of the teenagers he murdered, and one by one, they tear themselves free from his body. Freddy's confidence crumbles as the souls claw out through his chest, screaming and ripping him apart from the inside. His body weakens, his power drains, and for the first time, he loses control of the dream. In a desperate attempt to survive, Freddy is pulled into the real world, where Alice delivers the final blow. Freddy's physical form collapses, and his reign of terror comes to a violent halt. Why it's painful? Freddy's death is especially painful because it turns his greatest weapon against him. He fed on fear and souls, but those same souls become his executioners. The agony isn't just physical, it's psychological. Freddy is forced to face every victim he ever tormented, stripped of his dominance and mocked by the people he believed were weak. Being dragged into reality removes his illusion of invincibility. For a killer who ruled nightmares, dying powerless and overwhelmed by his own victims makes his end deeply brutal and humiliating. Jason Voorhees, Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. What happens? In Jason Goes to Hell, Jason Voorhees finally meets a definitive and brutal end. At the beginning of the film, he is lured into a trap by the FBI, who bombard him with heavy artillery until his body is blown apart. But Jason's evil doesn't die with his flesh. His spirit survives, hopping from body to body, corrupting and destroying anyone it possesses. The truth is eventually revealed. Jason can only be killed permanently by a member of his own bloodline. In the final confrontation, Jessica Kimball, Jason's niece, uses the mystical Voorhees dagger to stab his possessed body. As Jason's true form emerges, he is dragged down into hell itself. Demonic hands burst from the ground, tearing him apart piece by piece while he screams in rage and desperation. His mask is pulled away, and Jason Voorhees is finally consumed by the darkness he created. Why it's painful? Jason's death is painful because it is total and merciless. He isn't just killed, he is erased. The man who survived drowning, gunshots, explosions, and mutilation is powerless as hell itself claims him. There is no silent collapse or quick end. Jason is conscious, fighting as his body is torn apart by unseen forces. Being dragged to hell strips him of his legend. The unstoppable slasher becomes a screaming victim, punished eternally rather than granted rest. For a character defined by brute strength and endurance, dying helplessly while being pulled into eternal damnation makes Jason's end one of the most brutal and humiliating deaths in horror history. Michael Myers, Halloween Ends. What happens? In Halloween Ends, Michael Myers finally meets a definitive end after decades of terror. Severely weakened and no longer the unstoppable force he once was, Michael confronts Laurie Strode in her home for one last fight. The battle is brutal and personal, no grand spectacle, just raw survival. Laurie manages to pin Michael down, slashing and stabbing him repeatedly, making sure he cannot get back up again. With help, she restrains him completely, drains the life from his body, and confirms what the town has doubted for years. Michael Myers is truly dead. But the story doesn't end there. To prevent myth and fear from resurrecting him again, the town comes together and transports Michael's body to a scrapyard. In a grim, almost ritualistic moment, his corpse is fed into an industrial shredder, tearing him apart until nothing remains. For the first time, Michael Myers is not just defeated, he is erased. Why it's painful? Michael's death is painful because it strips him of everything that made him terrifying. He doesn't die as an unstoppable legend. He dies weak, restrained, and overwhelmed. The silence that once empowered him becomes meaningless. Being killed by Laurie, the survivor he failed to break, turns his legacy against him. The final humiliation comes in the scrapyard. Michael is denied mystery, denied resurrection, and denied myth. His body is destroyed publicly, reduced to nothing but scraps of metal and flesh. For a villain who thrived on fear and immortality, being dismantled piece by piece and forgotten by the machine is a brutally final punishment. Pinhead, Hellraiser. Bloodline. What happens? In Hellraiser, Bloodline, Pinhead meets one of his most definitive defeats in the franchise. The film reveals his origin as Captain Elliot Spencer, a man torn between human regret and demonic devotion. In the future timeline aboard the space station Minos, Dr. Paul Merchant activates a device designed to destroy the Lament configuration once and for all. This device doesn't just close the gateway to hell, it turns Pinhead's own realm against him. As the machine powers up, Pinhead is dragged into its destructive field. His Cenobite form begins to tear apart as the gateway collapses. In his final moments, Spencer's humanity resurfaces. The demon and the man are separated, and Pinhead is violently ripped back into hell as the box is destroyed. The machine overloads, erasing his presence and sealing the hell dimension away, seemingly ending Pinhead's existence. Why it's painful? Pinhead's death is painful because it destroys both sides of his identity. As a Cenobite, he believed himself eternal, beyond pain, beyond death, bound only to sensation and order, but Bloodline strips him of that illusion. He is not conquered by brute force, but by closure. The Lament configuration, the source of his power and purpose, is taken from him. Even worse, his human soul resurfaces just before the end, forcing him to confront what he became. The pain isn't just physical, it's existential. Pinhead dies knowing he was once human, once capable of choice, and that his eternity was a lie. For a being who claimed mastery over suffering, being undone by regret and finality makes his death deeply tragic and brutally ironic. Chucky, Child's Play, 1988. What happens? In the original Child's Play, Chucky finally faces death inside the Barclay apartment after his plan to transfer his soul into Andy fails. Having revealed his true nature, Chucky abandons manipulation and goes fully violent, attacking Karen and Detective Mike Norris with desperate brutality. He is shot multiple times, burned in a fireplace, and seemingly destroyed. But even after being reduced to a scorched, melted doll, Chucky gets back up and continues crawling forward, driven purely by rage. In the final moments, Mike shoots Chucky repeatedly until his small body is blown apart. The bullets tear through him, ripping off limbs and destroying his chest. With one final shot, Chucky collapses completely, his body finally motionless. The film makes it unmistakably clear, this isn't a fake-out or illusion, Chucky is physically destroyed. Why it's painful? Chucky's death is painful because it strips away his greatest weapon, control. Throughout the film, he relies on deception, fear, and psychological manipulation. But in his final moments, there's no cleverness left, only desperation. Being trapped in a doll's body turns every injury into prolonged suffering. He feels pain, burns, gunshots, and fear, all while being unable to escape. The slow destruction of his body forces him to endure death piece by piece. Even worse, Chucky dies screaming, exposed as weak and vulnerable instead of powerful. For a villain who prided himself on dominance and intimidation, being reduced to a broken toy, shot apart in front of helpless witnesses, makes his death not just brutal, but humiliating. Pennywise, IT, Chapter 2. What happens? IT, Chapter 2, Pennywise finally faces the Losers Club in the depths beneath Derry, where the creature has fed for centuries. Unlike past encounters, the group doesn't try to outrun or outsmart him. Instead, they confront Pennywise directly, refusing to be afraid. As they surround him, each member verbally attacks the creature, calling out his lies and exposing his dependence on fear. With every insult and moment of courage, Pennywise begins to shrink, physically and psychologically. His towering, godlike form collapses into something small, fragile, and almost pathetic. Eventually, he is reduced to a withered, child-sized version of himself, pleading and whimpering instead of threatening. Mike reaches into Pennywise's chest, pulls out his still-beating heart, and crushes it. Pennywise lets out a final, weak scream before his body collapses into dust, ending his terror over Derry once and for all. Why it's painful? Pennywise's death is painful because it destroys the illusion of power he relied on for centuries. He doesn't die in a grand battle or explosion. He dies exposed. Fear was his fuel, his identity, and his weapon. When the losers refuse to fear him, he has nothing left. The physical pain of his heart being ripped out is brutal, but the emotional pain is worse. Pennywise is humiliated, mocked, and reduced to begging. A creature that once tortured children becomes small, weak, and desperate. For an ancient cosmic predator, dying not through force but through loss of belief makes his end especially cruel. He isn't just killed, he is rendered meaningless. Candyman, 1992. What happens? In Candyman, 1992, the titular villain meets a harrowing and symbolic death that reflects both his power and his tragic past. After terrorizing Chicago's Cabrini Green neighborhood and targeting those who dare speak his name, Candyman is finally confronted by Helen Lyle, the determined graduate student seeking to uncover the truth behind his legend. In a tense and climactic sequence, Helen lures Candyman to a mirror, exploiting his reliance on fear and superstition. As he attacks, she stabs him with a hook, the very weapon that defines his murderous legacy. The violence is immediate and brutal. Candyman is physically overwhelmed, and his massive, imposing frame finally succumbs. The culmination comes when he is set ablaze, engulfed in fire that consumes both his body and his lingering supernatural presence. His screams echo through the empty buildings of Cabrini Green, fading as the flames reduce him to ash, ending his reign of terror. Why it's painful? Candyman's death is painful because it is both physical and deeply symbolic. He is a figure who thrives on legend, fear, and the stories told about him. Yet his end comes at the hands of someone who understands his myth and weaponizes it against him. The pain is amplified by the fact that he is burned alive. His iconic hook is rendered useless, his power stripped entirely. For a villain whose presence inspired terror for decades, dying helplessly in flames is humiliating. Candyman, once almost invincible through fear and legend, is rendered mortal, vulnerable, and ultimately erased. The death is a stark reminder that no matter how terrifying a legend may seem, every being, even a supernatural killer, can be undone, making his demise horrifyingly painful on both a physical and symbolic level. Ghostface, Scream, 1996. What happens? In Scream, 1996, the terror of Ghostface comes to a shocking and definitive conclusion during the film's climactic confrontation. Throughout the movie, the masked killer haunts the town of Woodsboro, targeting high school students with brutal precision. In the final act, Sidney Prescott lures the killer into a trap within her home. Ghostface attacks with his signature knife, attempting to continue his reign of fear, but Sidney, armed with determination and quick thinking, fights back. The twist reveals that the murders were committed by two people, Billy Loomis and Stu Maker, both donning the Ghostface mask at different times. As the confrontation escalates, Sidney manages to turn the tables. Billy Loomis is stabbed repeatedly and fatally by Sidney, collapsing as his own knife pierces him. Stu Macker, overwhelmed and caught off guard, is incapacitated and arrested by the authorities. The unmasking and deaths mark the end of the Ghostface terror, revealing the human faces behind the nightmare and bringing a violent close to their spree of horror. Why it's painful. The death of Ghostface is painful because it strips the killer of mystery and fear. The figure that loomed over Woodsboro as an unstoppable, faceless predator is revealed to be ordinary humans, exposing vulnerability. Billy's death is particularly brutal. Stabbed repeatedly, bleeding out while trying to maintain control, he dies powerless against Sidney's rage and survival instincts. The psychological torment is immense. The killer's elaborate plans and manipulation are undone in seconds. For a villain who thrived on anonymity, fear, and unpredictability, being killed by a resourceful victim he underestimated is humiliating. The deaths are swift but harsh, leaving no room for redemption, making the conclusion both shocking and emotionally satisfying for the audience. Samara Morgan, The Ring. What happens? In The Ring, Samara Morgan's death is revealed gradually through the cursed videotape and the backstory of her life and untimely demise. Samara was a young girl with supernatural abilities, capable of projecting images and influencing the living world through psychic power. She is cruelly neglected and ultimately killed by her adoptive mother, Anna Morgan, who throws Samara into a well to end the perceived threat of her powers. The girl sinks into darkness, trapped in the water, alone and forgotten, left to slowly die over time. The scene is haunting, not because of loud violence, but because of the cold, silent inevitability of her drowning. Samara's life ends in isolation, submerged in a well that becomes a physical and symbolic tomb. Her death transforms her into a vengeful spirit, whose rage and sorrow manifest through the cursed videotape, targeting anyone who watches it. The moment of death itself is silent and suffocating, leaving a lingering sense of dread rather than immediate gore. Why it's painful? Samara's death is painfully tragic because it is the result of betrayal and neglect rather than a confrontation. She is powerless, trapped, and utterly alone, unable to defend herself against the adults who should have protected her. The psychological and emotional weight of her slow, agonizing drowning is more disturbing than physical violence. Being buried alive in water, abandoned by those who were supposed to care for her, turns her death into a symbol of helplessness and injustice. For a character whose power comes from fear, dying quietly, betrayed, and forgotten makes her end both sorrowful and horrifying, leaving a lasting emotional impact that lingers far beyond the film.